Alchemy, the magnum opus, the great work. Historically, it's had two parallel functions, the physical and the mystical. And today I want to talk about how women and archetypes of womanhood have shaped both. I'm Dr. Lori Joan Swick. My areas of specialization are women in world religions and women's sacred arts. So I'm really excited to share with you today a little bit about the history of alchemy and how women have been important in that, and how we can practice alchemy in today in a way that's empowering. So come with me on this journey. I'm going to divide it into three parts. Looking back through my notes, there are three major epics of alchemy. One is the roots of alchemical practice. One is alchemy as it was developed in the East, and the other is how alchemy developed throughout the history of Christianity. And today I want to talk about the roots of alchemy and its significance for us now, and how we can be good alchemists today. So this is a lithograph of Alchemia. She's sort of an embodiment of alchemy. She was never considered a goddess as such, although the process of alchemy was referred to in female terms as the queen, the virgin, the bride, in many different ways. Alchemy has had kind of a female persona, if you will, throughout history. In the ancient world, we have evidence from 1200 BCE, from the early ages of the Iron Age, that a sort of a proto-alchemy was practiced. This is a picture, of course, is a meteor coming from the sky. In the ancient world, where there was no concept of, science as we have it today, when you see these huge fiery balls fall out of the sky, especially if they embed themselves into the earth, this has got to be a really significant sign from a god. And so this became thought of as the sky being the god, hurling the impregnating materials toward the Mother Earth, who is the goddess, and embedding it within it. And it's just, sort of the way, sort of an ancient concept of creation and how it might have happened on a divine level. But this morphed into the concept of there being a definite sky god and a definite a female goddess Earth, if you will, but who later kind of got the idea, morphed into the concept of being Mother Nature. But if you look at this sky god, this one is impersonating the wind, the wind god. Skies the sky god is in the form of wind. But if you look in his belly, there's actually a fetus, and this was considered the philosopher's stone. So here he is actually giving birth to the philosopher's stone, whereas the goddess, the earth, is doing the nurturing. Okay, and this caught on, and it formed the foundation for the belief about the alchemical process as it developed throughout human history. So in the ancient world, the belief was that in caves in the earth, within the depths of Mother Earth, stones would go from being very basic basalt type, prime matter, prime material, and go through this eons and eons of pressure, of just, being heated, being formed into all that it was believed each kind of rock went through every different kind of rock, and eventually hit its purest form, which was gold. And alchemy started out of that, just essentially and creatively. This is a picture of a cave in Bulgaria, and the hieroglyphs are very, very clear about the fact that this is a gestational process and a transformative process. So throughout history, the concept of heating things up, power over fire, to change their form. Think about iron as it's being forged into weapons, into tools. It became sacred. The person who had the power over the fire was usually the prophet. Here we have on the left here, this is Zoroaster, who is a prophet of the fire god Ahura Mazda, and he's approaching his altar, where of course he gives a sacrifice, with fire. And on the right we have a depiction of Moses before the burning bush, and of course the most dramatic revelation God made to Moses was through fire. So fire became very sacred, and then the people who had, control over it became the power figures, in the world, and the people who communicated with God in the ancient world. In Greece and Rome, this, took the form of being different, the forge gods the ones who had power over the forge, the fire and the anvil and the brimstone, were the gods with the power. Hephaestus, Zeus in Greece. Here they are forge, pounding the iron that sends the lightning down to the earth. But at his feet, you can see the weapons. So the concept of immortal life being associated with death. You have to go through this death to really live and be immortal begins to emerge. Mircea Eliade, who wrote a fabulous book about the history of alchemy called now I can't remember it, the Crucible and the Forge and the Crucible. Anyway, it's a fabulous book about alchemy. It wouldn't be hard to find. But he talks about this being when society really went from being one of creation to procreation, where it's not enough to just, be born as a human, but you have to die and be reborn again. You have to speed up that process, just like we do with the stones, to really become your spiritual self in this life or in the next. In the Near East, we have ancient scriptures showing how alchemy progressed into being something that was done in a furnace. This is a Persian alembic, it is called. You can see the fire under it, and it burns, the stone within it. Different materials were used. It was very secret. Everybody wanted the secret to immortality to themselves. And of course, if they reached immortality and left, they weren't here to tell us about it. But in this particular script, it says they call the stone within it, they call it the embryo. So as Eliade says, the obstetric function of this is just indisputable. But then we move on to Egypt and proto alchemy, if you will, early alchemy, had to do with mixing oils and unguents for death. This is a picture of Hathor as she is in the mortuary funeral of Hatshepsut, who was a female pharaoh, and she is overseeing, the actual unguents and the things that will be used and the way they're mixed for embalmment. And so, in other words, this is becoming a sort of a function of death. The transformation now is getting more philosophical. It has to do more with preparing the body for death and not just, transforming stones. And again, in Egypt, this concept of Anubis, the jackal-headed goddess who's weighing the heart in the canopic jar against the feather to see if somebody does reach immortality or not, is fairly well known. But this ibis-headed god Thoth is overseeing the process, and he's making notes about it. And he becomes a major figure later on, and we'll talk about him more later in the alchemical process as well. In Greece, the concept of Hermes. Okay, here's a god again. He's holding fire. He's holding a huge candelabra. It's all lit, but he's the messenger god. He's just trickster. Okay, and that becomes kind of important too. You never quite know what he's going to do. Very mercurial, but he also is a psychopomp god. Okay, he's somebody who oversees souls going through death and to see if they are become immortal or not. What kind of afterlife that they are going towards, or whether or not they have earned one. So again, you have this, alchemy becoming part of going from life to death and back to life again. So the figures of Thoth and of Hermes kind of got collated in the Greek world, where Egyptian culture was very, very strong. They kind of took the measuring physical um, pro processes of alchemy as they were developing, and the technical aspect of it. And that was collated, that was put together with concepts of philosophy that were emerging in Greece rather, like Plato's concept of forms, Aristotle's concept of matter, Empedocles' concept of the four seasons. All of this kind of got put together into this process that became less and less physically about changing stones into gold and more a cosmological, philosophical, mystical practice. Okay, so let's look at what's going on here before we move any farther. This is Hermes Trismegistus. He morphed the figures of I should say of Mercury and of Hermes rather, and Thoth kind of got put together in into him, and he became sort of a figurehead for early alchemy. A lot of early alchemical writings from the first to fourth century BCE were attributed to him, and we'll say more about him in my later video about Christian alchemy as it progressed. But let's just stop here for a minute and take a look at what's going on. Let's look at the archetypes that are coming out of this, the symbols. First of all, you have the goddess, the womanhood is been associated with prima materia, okay? She's the prime material. She becomes the stone. She becomes the womb for the stone. She doesn't actually give birth, okay? Now that becomes a god privilege at this point in history. But she becomes the matter that needs to be worked with, the physical matter. Now, think again, this has been, expressed as a woman, like we saw in the image alchemia. So through history, things like cars, boats, homes, buildings, things that have been pretty much manipulated by men have, taken on a female persona, and this is what's happening a lot in alchemy too. The womb has been appropriated from the female and given to the male god. So the concept of the sacredness of female birth giving is basically taken away. It is no coincidence that all of this happened about the same time during the same centuries that you had this gradual overcoming of matriarchal type societies by patriarchal ones, as though those patriarchal religions took root, as we saw like in Zoroastrianism and in the ancient Hebrew tradition with Moses. The womb is placed in men, okay? It's taken away from women. So the sacredness of women giving birth, what happens here is that women give birth. Now it's very, very physical, but it's not at all perfect. You have to die again and be reborn again through male agency, through male power, through a male womb, if you will, to be sacred and to be immortal. And this really works on a lot of levels as far as who's sacred and who isn't. And so anyway, the concept of the sacredness of being born perfect and beautiful and created divine, from your mother's womb got totally washed away. And I mean, this still really operates, as I'm sure you can see, in a lot of cultures today. So anyway, fire, the concept of fire throughout, the tempering with fire. Things can be molded in fire. Things can be changed in fire. The transformation of fire. If you've ever just sat and looked into a flame, it is absolutely mesmerizing, and it destroys. People's homes. People get burned. But it's also comforting. Heat. The fire. Heat from fire warms us. We cook our food with it. So just all the ambiguous properties of fire are very divinely um, inspiring. If you burn something in fire, what happens? The smoke goes up towards the heavens. So you can see why in the ancient world the concept of sacrifice was one of the main ways that you could communicate with God. But the fire is being the tempering, the agent that makes all of this possible, the transformation possible. I worked with this in my novel, The Sculptor and the Saint, where my sculptor he's tempering his tools, and he puts them in fire and he watches them, and then he hurls them into linseed oil, and it's all process of doing that. But it's all very symbolic of the change that's going on within himself as he's sculpting the statue. So the concept of fire is very pervasive in the concept of transformation. Think about, I grew up Catholic, the Catholic belief in purgatory, and there, this happens throughout a lot of religions. The belief that, if you're not bad enough to go to hell, you go to purgatory and you have all your sins, burnt away from you before you can actually go to heaven. I mean, this is operated throughout history, the concept of the archetype of fire. Hermes and Thoth, both psychopomps, tricksters. The process of transformation is very tricky. It, messes with you just like fire can in so many ways. Very ambiguous. But it is symbolic of going through, death to be reborn. But this can be done really, alchemically speaking, today when you go through hard times, how you go through the dark night of the soul where you feel separated, you suffer loss, you suffer pain. How you go through that and transform that can be a major alchemical transformation. And I think it is enough. But anyway, this also aligns with what we're seeing the mystics say that their mystical experience was. And if you haven't watched my videos on mysticism and how to be a mystic and especially Evan Underhill's telling us the five different stages of mysticism, this aligns with that. Okay, and later on, the alchemical process definitely does. Having to go through the dark night and go through sort of a, if not totally physical death, at least some sort of a spiritual death to be reborn. All of this came out of a lot of this practice at this different age. So, how do we translate that into modern practice? First of all, we women need to take back, the sacred concept of birth, of womanly functions, of what we do, and our importance being as divine as anything possibly could be. And then if you want to just do like rituals with this, kind of a fun thing to do is just to experiment with mother rocks. Get your own philosopher's stone and do your own alchemy, if you will. This is a picture of just a piece of basalt. It's the most common stone in the world. It's at the bottom of all the ocean's floors, but it is generated through volcanoes, comes up from the Earth Mother, as fire, and it transforms into this stone. Get yourself a piece. It's really readily available. If you have to buy some, it's very inexpensive. Another good one to use is peridotite. 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 That's it. Not peridot. It is different. But it was used a lot. Both of these, basalt and peridotite, were used a lot in alchemical uh, through in alchemical works throughout history. But this is really considered kind of the prime matter, the prima materia that other rocks were formed out of. And it again is very, very abundant. And it has a very, very rich underpinnings and myth that I wish I had more time to go into. But you can look that up. But get yourself a piece of a basalt or peridotite or any other igneous rock and just hold it, hold it in your lap. I would suggest doing a root chakra meditation at the base of your spine, and you can check my Kundalini video if you'd like more information on that. But just breathe into that and just get really relaxed. See if you can feel the power of the stone. Try to remember when you were very, very young, your own prime matter. Do you remember how you felt about yourself, how you felt about your life? If you can get back to that, we're all born with this indomitable spirit, this idea of who we are that is very, very pure before other people and other events and things start to affect it and make us feel differently about ourselves. But really, really keep breathing and meditating and try to remember that deep spirit you felt as a child when you felt fully your prime self. Hold it throughout your meditation. If you can, try to embed that in your mind. So beyond meditation, as you live your life, try to live in that. I think you'll find it very rewarding and very enriching. And it might be just the transformation you need. But anyway, put these rocks on your shrines, put them on your altars. Just let that be a little fun ritual element for you if you like. Things like that, physical things that form rituals really help empower us, I think, to own these things and to take these things in a better direction. But at any rate, I'm going to sign off. I do want to invite you to take a look at my website. There's a sample, a sneak peek at my upcoming book, The Snake Priestess, and the sneak peek is actually about a fire ritual that I believe the priestess did in the ancient world when she was communicating with the goddess. So you might want to have some fun with that. But tune in next time. Hopefully before too long, within the next couple of weeks, I want to record my next alchemy video on alchemy as it developed in the East, which I think you'll find very, very interesting. So anyway, until then, peace and grace.